Thank you for that introduction. I'm really, really grateful to be able to be here this evening. And I've been thinking about Scott Evans and Mary Harris because I was a 20 something at Chapel of the Cross in the 1980s when Mary Harris was there, and she served on my initial discernment committee for ordination process. An amazing woman. And then Scott, of course, was very involved in the diocese and also at St. Stephen's in Durham, where I served for 5 years. But my favorite memory of Scott was being by her side when she called Michael Curry to tell him that he'd been elected bishop of our diocese. I think she was head of the standing committee at that point, and I got to be the person who counted the votes. So I was head of the elections committee or something, but I got to stand with Scott when she called Michael on the phone, and it was just an exciting time. So two very fine women who are an inspiration indeed.
Okay.
So what I want to present tonight is that we have right now in our midst a crisis and a movement, and it is a really, as so often is the case, it is a really exciting time to be the church. Um, Let me see how I do it. Okay, so the crisis is that, no, how do I get rid of you guys off to my side? Hang on. I mean, I love seeing you, but anyway, well, you just will get a little bit off to the side. Um, the crisis is that we have there's an affordable housing crisis in our nation and in our state. Um, it's severe, and it's especially severe here in North Carolina. Now, before we start, there are two terms at least that I want to make sure we're all on the same page about. The first is affordable housing. Now, affordable housing is defined as when housing is affordable if it costs no more than one third of a person's monthly income. So if someone is earning $60,000 a year, that's a pretty good salary. $60,000 a year, that's $5,000 a month, and their housing is affordable if it costs them less than $1,600 a month. And I'll say more about that. The second term is housing burdened and or cost burdened, but housing burdened is if someone is paying more than a third of their income on housing. So again, if they are making $60,000 a year, $5,000 a month, if they're spending more than $1,600 a month on their housing, they are considered housing burdened. So here's that about affordable housing. 60,000 a year, 5,000 a month. Their housing is affordable if it costs less than $1,600 a month. I'm going to see if I can, where's my cursor? I was just going to see if I could, nah, I can't. Okay. Um, so if someone is earning minimum wage is still $7.25 an hour. And granted, a lot of people earn a little bit more than that, but still, $7.25 an hour, that comes to $14,500 a year. That's all. $14,500 a year or $1,208 a month. So if a third of their income is to go to housing, that would be $402 a month. Now, I don't know if you're up on what the rental rates are these days or mortgage rates, but $402 a month doesn't really cut it. If someone earning minimum wage most of their working life has to retire or has to stop working because of an illness or a stroke or whatever, their Social Security is going to be less than $750 a month. So again, if a third of their income goes to their housing, that's $250 a month. And that is just not feasible. I mean, we just don't have it. So affordable housing right now, wait a minute. Right now, there is no county in the United States of America in which someone earning minimum wage can afford a one bedroom dwelling. You just can't. There, at a third of your income, it's not possible. Right now in the United States, to afford rent for a 2-bedroom rental, a single person working full time has got to be earning at least $26 an hour, $52,000 a year, which is more than 3.5 times the federal minimum wage of $7.25 an hour. So I present this so you have a sense of what it means when we say affordable housing. 1/3 of your income. And obviously, as I said again, minimum wage, 7.25. A lot of people don't earn 7.25, but a lot of people do. Even if you're looking at twice that, even if you're looking at $15 an hour, which, you may remember from 2020 or 2016, Bernie Sanders going, $15 an hour is the livable wage. Well, it's not anymore, because even that wouldn't earn you enough to rent an apartment in most of the United States. So housing burdened is if someone ends up paying more than a third of their income on housing, then they're called cost burdened or housing burdened. And if someone ends up paying more than a third of their income on housing, then guess what? They have less to spend on all the other expenses of life, like food or clothing or transportation, right? And other necessities of life, medical care. So there are about 1.2 million households in North Carolina, all told, and 28% of those are now cost burdened in their housing. They're spending more than a third of their income on housing. I'm just going to try this one more time to see if I wish I could get the bar out of here, but I can't. What does it say? More. Nope. Okay. All righty. So not only do they have to, if they're cost burdened, not only do they have to compromise on the necessities of life, but they're very, very close to not being able to pay their rent in a given month or season or their mortgage. If their car needs repair and it costs over $500, if an illness takes them out of work so they can't earn any money, or if they have hospital bills, medical bills, then they end up not having enough money to pay their rent or their mortgage. And then further, in the last 5 years, rent in North Carolina has increased 38%. 38% in 5 years. And guess what? Most incomes have not increased 38% in 5 years. So, what's going on? Whoops. As a result, there are people who are living on the verge of homelessness. That's one category. Two, there are people who are temporarily homeless because they got evicted or they couldn't pay their mortgage or they couldn't take on a new rent. And so they're temporarily homeless until they can get their finances in order. And then there are people who are chronically homeless. And a lot of these are older men who worked for a minimum wage in their working years or slightly above minimum wage. They tend to be the chronically homeless. The chronically homeless tend to also have broken family relationships. The women are not as likely to have the broken family relationships as men, largely due to addiction. There are addiction problems. There's mental illness. There are all kinds of things that make men more likely to be chronically homeless than women. And they tend to be single. Currently, 1 out of every 1,250 people in North Carolina is homeless. Now that doesn't seem like much. Oh, that's less than 1%. But it ends up being just under 10,000 people are currently homeless in North Carolina. Now, you divide that into the number of cities that we have or whatever, and that makes for literally hundreds of people in each of the major cities and hundreds of other people. 10,000 spread across 100 counties. That's 1,000. Is that right? We met 100 counties. 1, 2. Yeah, that's an average of 100 in each county, but you can think about the population and how that would parse out. And then you add into it that just this last June, the Supreme Court issued an opinion that makes it easier for communities nationwide to fine, ticket, or arrest people who are living unsheltered, even when there's no adequate shelter available. In other words, makes it a lot easier for local uh, local communities to declare it's illegal to live unsheltered. And so where do they go? And that just adds to this pressure and this crisis. So a response is needed, right? And it's a threefold response. First, we need more affordable housing with rents and mortgages that households earning between $50,000 and $75,000 a year can afford, and that would be $1,400 to $2,100 a month is a third of that income. If they're making $50,000 to $75,000 a year, spending a third of their income on housing, they need to find a place to live that's $1,400 to $2,100 a month. Now, there's another term that I didn't make a slide for, but it's called the area median income, AMI. And a lot of affordable housing is determined by percentages of the area median income. The area median income in North Carolina really varies from one county to another. But in the city of Raleigh, the area median income is over $60,000 a year for one person. That means there are as many people who earn less than $60,000 a year as there are who earn more than $60,000 a year. In most of the counties in North Carolina, the area median income is like $35,000, $38,000 a year. So think about that. And how hard is it for people who have less than the area median income to find housing that they can afford? So one response that's needed is more affordable housing with rents or mortgages for households earning $50,000 to $75,000 a year. Two, we need to provide temporary housing or transitional housing for people who are temporarily unhoused. And often these are families, right? They're families where they had a medical emergency or they had a car problem or one of them lost their jobs for one reason or another, and they are temporarily unhoused. And then third is to provide permanent, safe housing along with support for those who are deeply poor, which usually is people who are earning less than 50%, less than 30% of the area median income. And to provide support in each response. There's a phrase that I really like, and I can't find the source of it, which is housing first doesn't mean housing last. You can't just put somebody in a shelter or a house and expect them to thrive. There needs to be additional support. I'm going pretty fast here. I'm worried that I'm going to run out of time before I'm done. I hope you're keeping up with. That's why I made these slides. I hope it makes it a little easier to follow along. Everybody okay?
Yes.
Okay. So those are the three needs. And there's this movement that's emerging that's really exciting in our day. Communities, cities, and towns are responding, and so are churches. This is what's so cool. There's this confluence of things happening. Affordable and supportive housing is needed. We've just said that. Governments and nonprofits can't provide it alone. And here in the 21st century, churches are finding ourselves with more land and buildings than we need, because I really avoid talking about how church attendance is going down and all of that. But the positive side of that is that we've got more land and buildings than we need. So churches are reassessing our response to the gospel for this 21st century. And guess what? Location, location, location. Even if governments and nonprofits were trying to find places to provide affordable housing, it's usually not in a very good location. But churches are in prime real estate. We're like right downtown, or we're right in the middle of this highway, or this, not in the middle of the highway, but right in really wonderful places. And, and we've got this call deep in our own narrative of community and connection and love of neighbor. So that's this amazing confluence, right, of the need and what churches have to offer. So how are churches responding? Well, there are some that are responding with really, really big and complex, beautiful answers, right? what's often happening in these big and complex settings is that a church literally gives up its land to a combination of nonprofits and government agencies who then are able to build these big apartment complexes on what was the church property. This is Gillum Place in Arlington, Virginia. They bulldozed the church. They bulldozed the church. They built this. What is it? It's wait a minute. Where I knew I wouldn't be able to read it as I wanted to, but it's like 6 stories and all of which are all accessible. 15 have roll-in showers. Apartments are affordable for houses earning 60% of the area median income or lower. The project includes 9,000 square feet of space for the church in the newly renovated center. So what happens often in these big projects where the church gives away their land, their worship space gets bulldozed, and they rent back 1 floor of whatever building it is, or half a floor, and they worship there. There's a place in Vancouver, Canada, where they gave up their parking lot, just their parking lot, and this apartment complex for 100 plus apartments was built where the parking lot footprint was. And then the bottom floor is still a parking garage, and the church rents back that parking garage on Sundays, but they still have their church building. This one was a Presbyterian church in Arlington, Virginia, and they just rent back a space. They've given up their property holdings altogether. Now, a lot of us would look at that and go, "Oh, that's nice," but I ain't gonna do that. That's too much. I like our worship space and everything else. So I want to pull back and look at some of the smaller projects. These big projects are happening all over California. California is a bit of a unicorn as always, but there are other churches in Arlington and Texas and all these other places. But in my work, I want to not focus on the big projects because I think they're overwhelming to most of us. So I want to pull back and look at what the simplest response that a church can offer, and that would be safe parking. Safe parking. Um, Christ the King Lutheran Church in Tigard, Oregon, has a safe parking program. And actually, one of the things that they did was there was a homeless camp that was in their town, and when the rules changed and the homeless camp was being threatened, they just invited the whole homeless camp to move to their property and said, "You'll be safe here." And this is getting into very much what's necessary in all these projects is that churches don't go it alone. Churches always collaborate with a nonprofit or some government agency so that the church is not the one that's having to figure it all out. The church is providing land or building and good neighbors, but we don't have to do all the details. So in this case, the safe parking program is managed by something called Just Compassion and the city of Tigard. And I just put this on here so you get a sense of what the kind of arrangements are. They say our site will accommodate 3 cars. It doesn't have to be a big project. 3 cars. Participants are pre-screened, including a background check, before acceptance into the program. In other words, so you wouldn't have, for example, child sex predators invited to your church parking lot. That's a whole different category. Nobody's asking churches to take that on. There are some that are doing that, but not many. But participants are pre-screened. Church doesn't have to do that. Cars must be operational and currently registered. RVs, trailers, and campers are not permitted. Each car has a dedicated parking place. This is where you're allowed to park. Participants must abide by the rules of the program and commit to a case management plan with the intention of transitioning to housing. So in all of these cases, the support includes professionals, not church folks, professionals working with the residents to help them transition into something more permanent. Hygiene is a priority, and let me see if I can find where the rest of that is. Anyway, the arrangement includes access to porta potties and hand washing stations. They've evolved since this. They now have, I learned that their website is about 4 years out of date. But now this church, like so many churches that are opening up to provide safety and housing for the homeless, they are now opening their whole parish house for people to come in, use the showers, have access to the kitchen, have access to the bathrooms, so they don't have to use porta potties anymore. As relationships develop, trust develops, and then the church shares more. Um, Participants are required to have their belongings either in their vehicle or they provide a shared storage pod, and everybody commits to the agreement. So you get a sense it's simple, it's small, and the church is just there to be a good neighbor. This one I love because it's it's an Episcopal church and it's in Springfield, Oregon, and they're providing Conestoga huts, like the old Conestoga wagons that went across the country, and they're finding a way. Again, I think it's just 3 huts, and they provide in their church house access to the kitchen, restroom, shower, and a laundry. And the ministry's partners are St. Vincent de Paul and the Lane Community, whatever. So in other words, church doesn't have to do it alone, but the church shares its property, and it can be a very small project. But 3 means that 3 people are not sleeping on the streets. It's huge. You talk to anybody who's spent any time on the streets, they talk about how you have to live in constant fear that somebody's going to, arrest you, that somebody's going to take away your stuff, that somebody's going to kick you and call you lazy. If they can just have a good night's sleep in a safe place, a church parking lot or a church backyard, what a gift. What a gift. But I just love these Conestoga huts. Okay. There's another kind of response, which are microhomes, and this is a little more commitment. The houses are like 6 feet by 9 feet. And this is the sanctuary at Green Street Church in Nashville. And there are several, this is actually what I'm finding is the most common response for churches is to build between 5 and 50 little microhomes, share their church building, showers, kitchen, um, laundry, all of that. And you'll see in this picture that's slightly blocked by the pictures of us. They also allow tenters to come in emergency situations. Now, the sanctuary at Green Street this is actually a Baptist church, is considered by the city of Nashville to be a sanctioned encampment on private property. This gets us into the whole question of what's allowed in each city and in each county and in each state. Because here's the thing: every church is different, every regional law is different, and so I can't just say, here are your choices and this is what you need to decide about, because you have to find out first what is allowed where you are. So, a sanctioned encampment on private property. The residents of the sanctuary are therefore afforded an additional level of safety and stability as they try to navigate resources for permanent housing. In addition to having a safe place to sleep, residents have full access to toilets, showers, and laundry facilities. So this gets us into this amazing piece of legislation that I personally had not heard about until I visited one of these places. It's called the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act, or RLUIPA. How many of you have heard of it? Anybody heard of it?
Mm-mm.
It's phenomenal. It was passed in 2000, the year 2000, and it it protects individuals and houses of worship and other religious institutions from any discrimination in zoning and landmarking laws. What it means, friends, is that as churches, we can do whatever we want on our sites, and the laws of the community can't get in the way. Now, that's incredible. But it also, if we want to be good neighbors and we don't want to anger our, the other people in our neighborhood or whatever, we don't want to just go willy-nilly and do whatever we want. But it means that if we want to put affordable housing on our site, we can do that as long as it's safe and meets meets standards of safe housing. This is an amazing thing to know about. And what's happening is that across the country, different churches or church groups are raising a flag on this and saying, here's what we want to do. Now, state legislature or city of Durham, how are you going to respond? The Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act. Okay. So I had a church's response was Conestoga huts, temporary safe parking, whatever. And now a next level up is to have your rectory or your parsonage given up for housing, or your Sunday school building repurposed to provide housing, or you buy a new property adjacent to your church to be used for housing. So my example for the first is Family Promise in southern New Jersey. And what they're doing is they're finding Episcopal churches where the rectory is not being used, because Episcopal clergy often don't want to stay in a rectory. They want to acquire a property of their own. Or you have small Methodist churches or any denomination where two are merging, and that leaves an extra parsonage over here. So two churches merge and they only have one minister, and so they have an extra parsonage. And Family Promise is an amazing nonprofit. Some of you may remember here in North Carolina back in the 90s, they were really going strong with getting churches to provide a place for families for a week, and the church would provide. I remember at St. Stephen's in Durham, we had people who would sleep in the library or the parish hall or whatever, and then they had bathrooms, and the church people would bring in food. Well, through COVID, they kind of changed around, and now they're looking to provide, stable shelter housing for families. It's largely families who are in transition, who just need a good place to stay for a few months until they can get their finances together or get the job or whatever. So that's a big one in southern New Jersey. Sunday school buildings, I'm sorry, I can't provide the particular example that I've learned about where, they're just using their Sunday school building for temporary housing, and working with a nonprofit to help people find their housing. Visited a church in Jackson, Mississippi, where a long time ago, like in the 1970s, they bought land next to their church, and then on that land, they built two apartment buildings to provide housing for their neighbors in need. And this was a Black church in Jackson where they witnessed a fire in the boarding house nearby, and they realized they needed to do something. And so they bought property and they worked with housing and urban development to build two apartment buildings. Amazing story. There's a church in Napa, Idaho that has a ministry called the House Next Door. They bought this house and they work with a nonprofit to provide housing for pregnant women to see them through the birth of their child and into better housing ahead. And the church has this fabulous sense of having ushered in, I don't know how many, a couple of dozen babies into the world and help their mothers and support their mothers while they find housing and a job. So that's transitional supportive housing. The next step up is what we did at the Advocate, which is permanent housing that's relatively autonomous. The church is there as a good neighbor, but the nonprofit does most of the interaction with the residents. This is the Church of the Advocate and the little church house. And then we built these three tiny homes on the church property. The architect designed them to match the church, so it's ridiculously cute. And they're about 350 square feet each. And each of the residents has been chronically homeless um, for over 10 years. Each of the residents has an income of less than 30% of the area median, so they're deeply poor. And my golly, it is just so beautiful and so rewarding to have them live in their own home. And my job as the priest was simply to be a good neighbor, to welcome them, to greet them. We have a church garden where we would, provide them with vegetables or whatever, but it's relative autonomy. And that you're seeing more and more. There's a church in Charlotte, Caldwell Presbyterian, that's converting their old Sunday school building into 20 residents like this. And there's a church in Syracuse, New York, St. Paul Episcopal, that's converting their Sunday school building into 10 apartments. So this is a little bit bigger, but it's not at that stage of that first one where it's like 6 stories and 100 apartments, right? It's a little more doable. And this is the last model I'll show, which is the full community model. And this is in St. Paul, Minnesota. Oh my goodness. They're called sacred settlements. And for every 3 small homes that are built for people who are chronically homeless, one is lived in by an intentional neighbor, someone who could live anywhere but is choosing to live among the poor. The houses do not have plumbing. I'll show you a picture. No, I won't. Oh, I had one earlier. Sorry. Okay. Anyway, the houses do not have plumbing, but the church provides. Here's the landscape. It says the common home. That's that's the church house. And so here are these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 houses. The 2 on the ends are lived in by people who are intentional neighbors, and the 4 in the middle are lived in by people who are chronically homeless. And in the common house is a common eating place. People can choose to just eat in their homes, but they're encouraged to eat together. Part of the model calls for intentional neighbors, permanent homes, a cultivated place, purposeful work, and supportive friends. In this model, the congregation is much more involved. So this is the church, and it shows you what it's like from the church looking back. This is that's the neighbor's house over there, but these are the tiny homes. And in this model, it allows for churches that can't host but will engage. And what you can't see because of the 5 of us that are on the screen is to the right of this tiny home is a chicken coop that a local church helped to build, or the local church that's not hosting the houses can build a garden. And then once a month, all the churches that are involved with this settlement come together for a potluck. And that's what this picture is on the left. There were, I don't know, 100 people there, and they learn about what's going on in the settlement and what's happening in the laws and the rules. It's amazing. Another response from the churches is advocacy by all. And this is really important. If you can't host a church and you can't engage with a church with a settlement, you can work to change rules, restrictions, codes, and regulations. California is again kind of the unicorn in this regard. They had a statewide effort. I'm kind of skipping a bunch of stuff here. They passed a bill because many of California's faith-based organizations are located on lands where multifamily housing is expressly prohibited by local zoning codes. In order to build homes on these lands, they must first rezone the land, a time-consuming and expensive proposition that can add years to the process of building affordable homes for Californians in need. So what this Senate bill does is eliminates the rezoning process, and it makes it much easier for churches to be able to build housing on their sites. In Minnesota, the people from Sacred Settlements got the legislature to pass a new law that allows faith communities to have the right to seek permits for micro unit dwellings on religious properties, with again bypassing a lot of the old restrictions. In Portland, Oregon, the city of Portland, so those two are states. Portland, Oregon, um, they removed the land use review requirement for affordable housing developments by faith communities or community-based organizations, allowing churches to repurpose up to half of their parking spaces for housing. A lot of churches aren't using all of our parking spaces anymore. And the city gave $9.7 million from the state to cover pre-development fees for affordable housing projects on church-owned land. So you see, I don't know what we could do in North Carolina, but what's really beautiful about this is that it threads the needle between what we might call the conservatives who want churches to have church rights and what we might call the progressives who want to provide affordable housing. And that's what happened in Minnesota, was that you got Republicans and Democrats bipartisan together on this legislation. It's really cool. Somebody's got to do it. What's my deadline? Was it 8 o'clock? I hope. Daryl, when am I supposed to finish by? Don't say 7:45.
No, keep on going, Lisa. This is wonderful information.
Okay, it's a lot.
How much more can you share with us?
No more than 5 minutes. I'll just keep going real quick.
No problem. Take it to 8 o'clock.
Okay. So how do we find our steps? How do we begin to know what we're supposed to do in this movement? There's all this great stuff happening. All these denominations all across the country are doing all this cool stuff. What do we do? Well, the first step is to really, I think, is to have a group at your church meet to talk about Christian hospitality. Why are we called to this in scripture and tradition? Why do we care? What is the church's response? How open are we really to sharing our bathrooms or our shower or building a shower or sharing our kitchen with people who have been homeless? Let's have conversations about the stranger and what are our fears. I was at St. Philip's one Sunday when one of the librarians said that one of the culture shocks he experienced in coming to the United States was that in Liberia, the word for stranger means someone who needs your help. Whereas in the United States, there's this concept of stranger danger, and you're supposed to be wary of the stranger. Well, what would happen if we could overcome that cultural fear of strangers? A book I recommend is called Making Room by Christine Pohl. She wrote it in the 1980s, but I got to lead a group of clergy and lay leaders in the Diocese of Mississippi with it this past early in the summer. And it was really beautiful to guide us through these conversations about what we think about Christian hospitality and who we're willing to be hospitable to and what are our fears. Then we have to look at what our resources are. Our people, our buildings, our land. What do we have to offer to this crisis in our state and in our community? After we've looked at ourselves, the next step is to explore what the local region is about. What is the local need? How many homeless people are there? How many of them are single men? How many of them are families? What are some of the responses that are already happening? Who are the nonprofits that are working with the homeless population? When we started Pee Wee Homes, it was the brainchild of these fabulous young adults who already knew the homeless population in Chapel Hill. I mean, they were friends with them all. They'd been talking to them for years. And so they brought that resource to the conversation. They weren't from our church, but they brought the idea to the church. That was amazing. So What is the local need? What is already happening? What are the local responses? And what are the local restrictions? What are you allowed to do? What are you not allowed to do? If you're not allowed to do it, what are you willing to fight for or work toward? So the third steps are exploring the possibilities. Who are the possible collaborators in our region? Who are the nonprofits who might want to work with us? What models are they using? Do we want to try something else, something completely new that hasn't been tried before, like Pee Wee Homes? What are their ideas that they would do if they had, gosh, you've got an acre of land to offer? What we would do if we had an acre of land, that sort of thing. And what are our capacities and our limits? What are perceived and what are real? Because here's the thing with all of these models, the more interaction the people of the church have with the people who are there, the more possibility there is for transformation for everybody. And of course, you want to be careful. When we started the Pee Wee homes, we talked to the congregation about these are their homes. We don't just go and sit on their porches and talk to them. We need to develop friendship and relationship, and that's why these potluck dinners are good. Community activities are good. Sharing your space is really good to develop relationships. But what's needed to do any of this work is to have a clarity of vision. So you need to take the time to figure out what your vision really is. A lot of flexibility, it won't go exactly as you expect it to. A lot of patience. Any of these processes are at least 3 years from start to finish, from when you have the idea to when you actually have human beings living on your site. And then they have to have patience with the humanity of the residents, that they won't be perfect and there will be challenges. And then you need to be able to collaborate. A church cannot do it by itself. You have to collaborate with others, and you may resist that. And then you have to have a sense of faith and a sense of calling, that God is calling you to this, because that's what's going to carry you through when things get bumpy. By golly, this is what it means to be faithful in the 21st century. This is what it means to respond to God's call. And I have question marks because I'm still exploring that. And I just end with some of the quotes from our scripture and tradition. So God created humankind in his image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. So rich or poor, homeless or housed, we're all created in the image of God. And that impacts how we respond to our fellow human beings. They are all really created in the image of God. The Nicene Creed, for us and for our salvation, he came down from heaven by the power of the Holy Spirit. He became incarnate from the Virgin Mary and was made man. God became a human being. Therefore, all of humanity is lovable and infinitely precious. Rich or poor, homeless or housed, every human being is lovable and infinitely precious because God became a human being. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul and might, and love your neighbor as yourself. That's the two great commandments. And so we've got to love our neighbor. And our neighbor isn't just our friend or the person already sitting next to us in the pew. And then the last one, the one most often quoted on any social gospel work, truly I tell you, just as you did it to one of the least of these who are members of my family, you did it to me. And so by serving and welcoming and embracing others, we are serving, welcoming, and embracing Jesus. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I hope I was able to give you some of the excitement. It's a great season in which we're living, and there's already a lot of churches that are doing this good work. Some of y'all might be doing this good work and have something to share with us.